everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit us online at projectionsinc.com and iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Orqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. A recurring theme on Project HR has been the way that many of the challenges we've faced in recent years have forced us to examine the way we work and allowed us to consider new work models that might allow for higher productivity, more innovation, improved employee wellness, and ultimately greater success. So on today's episode, we're focusing on the idea of achieving those goals by advocating for the adoption of human-centric practices in the workplace. My guests today, Tavis and Stela Lupushor, are employee and workplace experience experts, and together they are the authors of Humans at Work, the art and practice of creating the hybrid workplace. Anna and Stela, thank you so much for joining me today on Project HR.
Delighted to be here. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thrilled to be here.
So I do think that this is precisely the book that we need right now, as we're all trying to piece together what this new world of work is going to look like. So how did you come together to write this book, and why this book specifically?
Stella and I have had a very long relationship because we work together, partner on many projects, and specifically right now, I am the director of Human Capital Management program at NYU School of Professional Studies, where we are together working and educating the next generation of HR leaders in exactly the new next future focused human resource practices. And so this relationship goes in many different directions, from teaching to writing to speaking and thought leadership that Stella and I share.
So in the book, you mentioned 4 critical factors that drove the dramatic changes that we're seeing in our workplaces today. Can you tell me a little bit about those 4 factors?
Absolutely. Let me take that. So when we think about disruptions that are impacting the world of work, we would categorize them into 4 big elements, right? One category is demographic changes. We're seeing a very different pattern in terms of fertility rate and longevity, and we have multiple generations working side by side. We have mobility not only between geographical areas, between urban and rural areas, but also between jobs. And with the events of the past 2 years, I think technology has accelerated all of the movements and changes. So the second category is digitization. So this is the adoption of digital technologies, of bringing more work-centered technology to enable workers to do their work. And as a result, all of these digital interactions create significant amount of data, and we have cloud capacity, we have data processing technologies, we have AI to make sense out of all of this data. So this is the third category, which is datafication. So using analytics and analytical capabilities to distill patterns of behaviors and make decisions differently, make choices and influence the behaviors in a different way. And then the last one is disintermediation. It is elimination of intermediaries between the traditional industry incumbents. And a perfect example of disintermediation is Amazon, right? There is not one single industry that they belong or operate in. They are a technology first leader that is moving into different industries and disrupting and transforming them in a new way. So it creates asymmetries, it creates different kinds of relationships between players in the ecosystem, and it requires a very different way of developing the talent.
Okay. Anna, how critical is this moment in establishing new norms? Like, we seem to be at a crossroads.
Exactly. I think, let me throw in a quote because I really like to see what, the industry leaders have to say about this so that it doesn't come out as purely academic or subjective. Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock, the largest investor in the world, he puts out a letter to CEOs every year. It's really a strategy setting document that a lot of industry leaders read. And I just want to quote from pull out a line from the latest letter in 2022. He said, "No relationship has been changed by the pandemic more than the relationship between employers and employees."
Mm-hmm.
So and that's coming from the top investor in the world,
Mm-hmm.
which means that even at that level, we're seeing a paradigm shift from, kind of a shareholder-based economy to the economy that is focused on stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to your point, most companies today, certainly our clients, talk about valuing their employees, but that's not the same as creating a human centric workplace, is it?
Oh, no, absolutely not. A couple of points here. We are starting with the term employee, and that in itself, it's a small portion of the privileged segment of the labor force that has stability in their employment, right?
Mm.
That's why one of the initial changes or reframes we started with is to expand the definition and the term to be workforce, because we need to look at the entire workforce that comes to help the organization deliver on its promise. Additionally, most organizations value their employees as long as they deliver on the business outcomes and complying with whatever the requirements of the organizations are, right? So at the core, workplaces right now are designed to maximize the business results. When we think about the human centricity, is the workplace that is designed to maximize the worker experience so they can deliver on those business results and thrive in the process.
Hmm. And your book specifically addresses the hybrid workplace. Is hybrid inherently more human, or is it just that we haven't been working with a roadmap for hybrid and need some guidance?
Let me jump in on that one. I kind of, in our partnership, I'm kind of the historian of
Hmm. Hmm.
of the project. And
Uh-huh.
I think we have a fundamental bias in all the literature about the future of work, where we're just looking exclusively and making comparisons to the pretty much industrial age. We even then counting the revolutions, that's the World Economic Forum, et cetera, that kind of the standard way of describing the situation. We're looking at industrial revolution as a starting point in the development of work. And I took a much deeper dive into the history. And my argument here, and our argument, is that the human relationship with work has very, very deep roots. And if you look at, for example, the artisan communities, communities that really operated much more on the model where we're going to rather than where the model we're coming away from. They were, the communities that where a lot of work was concentrated in the artisans' homes, or and the whole society was built around these communities or guilds in the European sense, where people were connecting with work at a very, very personal level. So we looked in the book, we looked at those precedents of where, and other models of creating workplaces and workspaces than where industrial revolution pushed us into, which is more kind of
Mm.
conveyor line manufacturing, et cetera. That's a much, much more recent development. So I think we are kind of coming to full circle and reinventing, in a sense, with the different levels of technologies, the different levels of connection, but
Hmm.
fundamentally revisiting those models that are deep into our DNA as human communities of how we can work in these types of hybrid places and more, closer proximity, and then being able to, integrate better the
Hmm.
work and the life that we kind of were pushed into through the pandemic. So
Hmm.
that's kind of a historical spin, and I'm sure that we're going to be reinventing and inventing new ways of approaching hybrid. But the bottom line is, it's not the technology is new, but the way of organizing ourselves around those hybrid formats is not new.
That's fascinating, and I love the juxtaposition there. You were talking about the artist communities and really that true integration of self between your work and who you are. I love that idea. All right, Stella, Anna, I'm going to have to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when we return, I want to explore your framework for building a more human-centric workplace. We'll be right back.
So, you've provided your supervisors with the training they need to create a positive environment and keep your company union-free. But can they put that knowledge into action? Wise Words e-learning will teach your supervisors how to respond appropriately to tough employee questions about unions, including questions about dues, collective bargaining, promises, and more. Based on solid adult learning theory, Wise Words guides supervisors, helping them practice their skills in a fun and engaging format that sticks with them over time. Wise Words e-learning is delivered in microbursts of learning and is available online 24/7. Your leaders can practice their skills anytime and anywhere there's an internet connection on any device. Wise Words training will protect your company from ULP charges and give your leaders the confidence to connect with employees. Learn more and sign up for a demo at projectionsinc.com today.
I'm back now with Anna Tavis and Stela Lupushor, the authors of Humans at Work, the art and practice of creating the hybrid workplace. Now, in the book, you refer to this movement as a humans at work revolution, and you're not using that word revolution lightly. So how quickly do you see these changes coming?
The what we are talking about here is already here. I think what we are doing is looking at what's arrived, and if we look at the potential and opportunities that these technologies are allowing us to explore, they're pretty much here. I think the question is around adoption and scaling, and being able to integrate and reorganize the whole society around these new forms of working. So technically, we can do it now. It's a question of readjusting our mindsets, readjusting the whole, set up around the rhythm of work overall, and that's going to take time.
So the organizing principles of humans at work are built around a framework that you call the W's framework. Stella, can you explain what that framework is?
Absolutely. So it is the puzzle of the work environment. Think of it as components that have to be deconstructed and put back together in a slightly different way.
Hmm.
Specifically, the how the work is defined, how the workforce is identified and matched to perform that work, how the workplace is designed to enable those pairings to be the most optimal and deliver on the work expectations, the worth, which is really the value exchange, because not everybody comes to work for the same reason. So, what are some of those motivators that will enable the first three W's to work together? So, those are the core four elements and four W's. And then the enabling four W's are looking through the worker lens, so worker journey, end to end, from the point where they don't know anything about the brand until they discover, until they come to work, until they perform, etc. Using human-centered design thinking, so the work experience design, to the worker experience. That's not the same as designing it from the customer experience or from what the technology can do or what from traditional processes. It's really looking at what it's like to be an employee and worker in the work environment, and then using work tech to enable all of this, because technology has a huge role to play.
And so your book is structured on the first four W's. I want to delve into those a little bit. So the first W is work, and that gives us a little background on how we got here. Is that about right?
Yeah, we start with work because we use this word very generally, but there is a, kind of a timestamp on how it's being perceived. And again, I kind of looked back into the evolution of work and specifically looked at as a metaphor, because that's what I like to do. I was
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at the clothing associated with work and how we kind of learned to talk about work through the clothing that people wore. And specifically, we're looking at, blue collar, white collar economies, right? Where we had, at the time when denim was invented, that was kind of a very durable, very, hardened type of, clothing. The blue collar was also kind of
Mm-hmm.
standing for a certain type of work that required a lot of muscle. Let's put it that way. And then there was the kind of the white collar economy that grew out of industrialization, the office work that was in the kind of the first time the word was used, like in the 30s, where the office workers, the clerks, were showing up in the streets in the daily commutes, and again were identified by the uniform they wore to work. What we are seeing, though, is there's kind of almost to Stella's point about deconstructing that whole, outfit face of work, where we finally arrived at no collar economy. The term was coined by the former CEO of IBM, Jeannie Rometty, in 2017, when she was actively advocating for looking at technical jobs as no collar
Hmm.
workers or no collar jobs. And in
Hmm.
fact, in a letter to the president at that time in 2017, she wrote that we need to be seriously investing in the no collar workforce. And then when we arrived at the pandemic, we ended up with a Zoom shirt, which is the shirt that hangs on the back of the chair,
Mm-hmm. Right.
ready for the next Zoom call, et cetera, et cetera. And that also is an indication where that whole kind of marking with the clothing you wear ended up with.
Right. So part two of the book covers the workforce and by extension, the workplace environment. Can you tell me a little bit about this aspect of the topic?
Sure, I can dive into that. So, when we think about traditional ways of finding talent, right, usually we may have a binary type of decisions. Do we hire? Do we contract? Do we insource? Do we outsource? And I think that kind of binary decision making no longer addresses the complexity of finding the right type of worker to get the work done. So the more we can start thinking and broadening our aperture and saying, look, for certain kinds of activities, you need somebody who is a regular full time, who can come and perform the work and can stay with the company and lead others, etc. But a lot of the work does not necessarily need to be done by regular employee, right? You can have a contingent worker, you can have a freelancer, you can
Hmm.
source teams, you can strike partnerships and alliances, you can form ventures with other organizations, you can acquire. So the
Hmm.
more creatively you can tap into the broader spectrum of types of workers, the easier will be to find the right match to perform the work. And then when it comes to the workplace, you really need to think, what is the most optimal match of the work activity to the worker who will do it? And then based on that, determine what is the workplace environment to be conducive to that. Not everyone needs to be in the office, as we've seen over the past couple of years.
Hmm.
Not everybody needs to be on Zoom. The more easier and the more we can construct the workplace environment to enable that orchestration of work, the more we'll be able to tap into underserved, underprivileged segments of the population, because you can give 2 hours of work to a mom who only has 2 hours in the afternoon while the child is asleep, or
Hmm.
you can provide a technology that allows people who physically cannot come to an office because of disability or transportation issues. So you can create a more vibrant labor force by rethinking that matching and then creating the worker experience in a way that maximizes the output. And importantly, is not to think about physical workspace as a separate entity than the digital. It's about designing it so regardless of where you work, the experience is equivalent.
Now, the third W, workplace, addressed in part 3 of the book, how is workplace addressed differently than we do in part 2?
Excellent question. We are looking at the workplace now in part 3 from kind of the designer and employer perspective. In the workforce, we were looking at workplace and worker. Here is, the kind of the reflection on what do we need to do to accommodate all of these different options for the workplace. And we're looking at a whole new field of innovation in the space of workplaces. We're looking at the emerging ecosystem of companies that offer alternatives to the kind of binary way of looking at the workplace as the office, kind of the HQ, and the home office. Because there could be, to the point of the diversity of needs, there could be different needs, and there's just as many people who do not want to work from home and want to have an alternative space. And that's where we're looking at companies like Liquid Space, for example, and all of those descendants from what we all know so well, WeWork, that also has reinvented itself in a certain way. We're looking at companies that are a combination of, let's say, Airbnb and WeWork. The company of particular interest is Cody, that exists in the big cities, that makes, arranges for workplaces all within a walking distance to where the distributed workforce lives. So instead of assuming, like we do now, that people who do not want to be in HQ are going to be working on a kitchen table,
Mm.
because there's a lot of disadvantages of kind of assuming that the workplace has the same, other than the convenience that Stella talked to. There are lots of disadvantages of people not being at home. I mean, one of those is not everyone has a big home to have
Hmm.
a separate space. We all know people working from the closets and the kitchens, in the bedrooms. We all seen it on Zoom.
Hmm. Hmm.
And people who just need that separation, where, for example, we talk about the importance of boundaries. So it
Hmm.
is important to have a boundary between where, for some people, where you do work and where you care for your family, for example.
Hmm.
There's plenty of commercial real estate with the closure of retail places, et cetera. And there are some entrepreneurial solutions to that, where some of those commercial spaces have been turned into all sorts of very flexible workplace facilities. So lots of options, and kind of getting us from out of this binary home or office type of
Hmm.
decision making.
Hmm.
There are
Yeah.
lots of options out there. So we explore them, we explain how that works, and the benefits of looking at your options in a much more expanded way.
That's fascinating. And the fourth part of Humans at Work addresses the fourth W, which is worth. And this is where you talk about employee rewards. Tell me about what that means in a human-centric workplace.
Absolutely. And it's broader than rewards. We have to start thinking about the value exchange, right? What is it that individuals come to work for? What is it? What are the motivating factors for them? And then what is the organization expecting from them, and how those two align? So, from an organizational perspective, of course, there are certain things that are fundamentals, right? Everyone wants to work for an organization that provides fair remuneration, that
Hmm.
has ethical standards, that has a safe and accessible work environment. But when we start looking at the human expectations, the other things could be very complex set of value entities and components. So some people want to work so they can grow their skills. Some
Hmm.
want to work so they can attain that status or that title. Some want to leave an impact and leave a legacy behind. Some want to just come and perform what their duty are and 5 o'clock or whatever the checkout time, just go so they can do other things they prioritize in their family at that point in time. So the more we can think creatively about that range of expectations and values people want, employment values, and the more we can, as an organization, decide what is it that we want to be known for? What is it that whoever comes to work with us or associate themselves with us will know consistently they will get that? And then build those into all the decisions related to the workplace, right? This is the place where you'll develop your skills. You will become reputable. You'll become part of our alumni community. And that gets built into all the decisions. You may not be able to make all the same equivalent money that you will get in other organizations, but you will be part of a family here. So that type of choices organizations need to start making and then building into the employment brand, into the communications, and of course internal practices, because workers are going to share what's happening internally. So you have to be congruent with the message and the image you're trying to portray.
For sure, for sure. Stella and Anna, I'm going to take some time out for another quick break, but we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guests today are Anna Tavis and Stela Lupushor, employee and workplace experience experts. Together, they are the authors of Humans at Work, the art and practice of creating the hybrid workplace. And we are back. Now, Anna, your book includes an entire chapter on empathy, and you didn't shy away from talking about the backlash against it. To me, it makes sense that empathy would play a role in creating a more human-centric approach at work. How do you respond to the doubters?
Surprising as it may seem now, at the kind of tail end of the pandemic, empathy is a very new sort of development in the workplace. We're just coming out of the whole generation of the workplace culture, where the mantra was that it has to be very lean, very focused, productivity focused, and any redundancy of which empathetic, compassionate way of looking at the employees was a distraction from the delivery of those outstanding results that that companies were delivering to their shareholders. What's changed, obviously, with the pandemic, even though the trend started before the pandemic, is the empathetic cultures actually prove that they can win. We've seen companies dealing with the impact of the pandemic, either in the non empathetic kind of bottom line focused way, and those were, significantly suffering from the impact of that lack of trust and a breach of trust with their employees, and the companies that, despite the challenges, actually focused on investing, empathetically investing into employees, and there were leaders who were leading with empathy their organizations and their businesses, and successfully managed to to create a much more compassionate workplace. So, but the pandemic is just an accelerator. What we are seeing with the coming technology, that we're going to see empathy built into the design of products and services. That's where the new conversation about inclusion also comes in, where we are going to be able to scale empathy across all sections of the business, not only, again, in the relationship between employees and the employers, where employers will have to work much, much harder to retain their most talented employees, but also in how the company approaches their clients, their customers, and what kinds of products and services they deliver. So that's where we found there's a huge opportunity in the companies embracing that empathetic state and creating empathetic cultures inside their organizations.
I did want to make a point of mentioning the book's extensive appendix, which might be incredibly helpful. Tell me a little bit about the appendix and what you both included there.
So appendix goes into those 7 Ws we mentioned at the beginning, the elements of that framework. It's really a series of decision tools and methods to help HR on their transformation journey. And I think it's important to look at each of these frameworks independently to start with, because there's no perfect place to, it's not a linear path, right? Sometimes you may have a new technology solution that you're implementing, and those elements of the framework can be applied and the transformation can be looked through the lens of those 7 Ws. Or it could be an analytics driven transformation, or it could be reacting to a new transaction, a merger or an acquisition. So it's really a collection of tools that leaders can use to apply depending on the nature of their transformation they're trying to approach or implement.
And I also want to touch on the fact that both of you work at New York University in the Human Capital Management Department. Tell me a little bit about the programs available at NYU.
Thank you for asking this question. At NYU, we realized that the future of the workplace, and specifically the HR profession, is going to be intertwined with analytics and technology. And early on, we started pivoting from a more traditional kind of SHRM competency-oriented HR program toward much more, analytics and technology based framework. The classes we teach in the specifically analytics and technology program, which is a master's degree, first of all, it's an accelerated degree. You can complete it in 1 year, going full time. But the courses we teach are intelligent automation, algorithmic responsibility that focuses on specifically the need to be attentive to the ethical issues associated with technology, workforce transformation, where we're looking at workforce planning and different tools associated with that, as well as foundational principles of HR based in psychology and some of the practices, financial management, et cetera, understanding the broader context of their organization. And what we are finding is the students who are gravitating toward our program come from a variety of backgrounds, but it's mostly aspiring early and mid-level HR professionals who also understand that the future of our profession is not going to be as it used to be, just based in liking people, as we often hear, but more around bringing those strategic expertise that are based in evidence, but at the same time informed with empathy. So it's not the business. We often are asked about, oh, why not just have business analytics and business analytics competencies and just import those people from technology programs into HR. We think that there's a whole different domain of professionals who are skilled in analytics, but at the same time are also behaviorally and psychologically equipped to work with people, with humans who are a lot more a very complex group
Sure.
and demographic that requires a combination of skills and the ability to apply those technologies and data to the workplace environment.
So Humans at Work won't be released until late March, but if I understand that correctly, but it is available for pre-order. Is that right?
That's correct. It's available for pre-order on Kogan Page, our publisher's website, on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble's, Target, and any other places where you buy your books.
And for our audience, remember that at Project HR, we do all the hard work for you. We've listened back to the episode and taken detailed notes, including links to where you can buy the book that we will share in our episode companion guide. And you can download that for free at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Anna and Stella, it is time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions I like to ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you both ready?
Yes.
All right. Question number 1 is a topic showdown, and I'm going to give you both a chance to answer each question. In this episode, we've been talking about creating a human-centric workplace. With that in mind, and this is for both of you, which of these songs with the word human in their title is better? Michael Jackson's Human Nature or Human by the Human League?
I'll go with Michael Jackson.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay, very good. We have agreement. All right, next question. What is the best book that you've read recently?
Okay, I'll go first. Is
right.
Humanocracy by Gary Hamel.
So my favorite, a real treasure, it's called Work, A Deep History from Stone Age to the Age of Robots by James Sussman.
All right, very good. Anna, Stella, what is your favorite thing about the work that you do?
I love working with students. I think this is the most rewarding part of being a college professor, is that you see professionals coming in into our classrooms, often kind of looking for meaning, looking for direction, and then coming out of it as industry leaders. A few years down the road, these are the people who are going to be continuing to reshape the profession we all so much love and dedicated our lives to.
And mine is really the opportunity to make an impact and focus on the future and really humanize the work environment for everyone.
Very good. All right, tell me each of you the best piece of advice you've ever been given.
Okay, I'll go first. It's actually a question. And the question is, what's enough?
Interesting.
For me, it's about embrace the challenge. There are lots of challenges along the way, and not to shy away from looking at challenges, embracing it, challenging yourself, always stretching.
Very nice. All right, last question for each of you. Who or what inspires you?
For me is Yotam Ottolenghi. I love to cook, and Yotam is a chef. He has a bunch of restaurants in London. And the difference between Yotam and all the other chefs, he's really bringing flavors and people together versus bringing the attention to techniques or his own personal ego.
Nice.
Wonderful. And for me, I will be probably more, business focused. I really admire Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft right now, and to see how he was able to transform the company that was in a very, very different place and bring so much humanity, bring so much humility to his job. You just do not see leaders like Satya Nadella coming through. Once in a century, I would say, phenomenon. And it's not about his great wealth or his toughness that we usually see so validated. There's not a drop of narcissism in Satya Nadella's style that I see, and I'm a big student of how he leads. Really admire the person behind the wheel of Microsoft.
Nice. I like that. Thank you so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR. Anna, Stella, it's been a pleasure to have both of you on the show.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thanks to our listeners. And once again, this is your reminder to grab that companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR, or you know someone who would, please feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And last but certainly not least, to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.